Hello friends, welcome to Acquire IAS. Today we are going to discuss important topics for UPSC prelims 2020 friends, right? UPSC prelims 2020, and it is the last video of this important topics friends, right? So you can call me on this following number for any queries or personal guidance, right? Right friends, and you can download Telegram channel and you can join our Telegram channel for getting newspaper PDF daily friends, right? Newspaper PDF and newspaper analysis notes and etc. various other kind of PDFs as well friends, right? So stay tuned till end of the video friends, right? Next we see further here. So these are few details about me, so you can visit these below given description links friends, right? Next we see these are details of my offline batches, right? So today our first topic of the important topics are right friends, today's our important first topic is Fisheries Act of 1897, right friends? Fisheries Act of 1897, Fisheries Act of 1897. Next is Tea Act of 1953, Tea Act of 1953. Next is Destructive Insects and Pests Act of 1914, Destructive Insects and Pests Act of 1914, right? Next is Indian Forest Act of 1927, Indian Forest Act of 1927. Next thing is Agricultural Produce Grading and Marketing Act of 1937, Agricultural Produce Grading and Marketing Act of 1937. Next topic is Indian Coffee Act of 1948, Indian Coffee Act of 1942, right? So in this topic, how you should refer these all acts, right friends? How you should refer? So first of all, you should refer each and every provision of this acts, right? Acts friends, right? Next thing is, here I am talking about Fisheries Act, so you need to go little bit deeper about fishes, right? Under which act it was protected, right friends? How it is contributing in our GDP, that is a blue economy, how the it is contributing to the economy. So you need to go through all these things, right friends? Next is, and I have taught about Tea Act of 1953, Tea Act of 1953. So you should go for tea and what kind of climate it is needed, what kind of temperature it is needed, what kind of soil, rainfall, etc. are needed for the cultivation of this tea. You need to go in this direction friends, right? So next we see further Customs Act of 1962, Customs Act of 1962, right friends? Next is Import and Export Control Act of 1947, Import and Export Act of 1947, right friends? 1947. Next is Seed Act of 1966. Next, Rubber Production and Marketing Act of 1947, Rubber Production and Marketing Act of 1947, right friends? Next is Cardamom Act of 1962, Cardamom Act of 1962. Next is Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act of 1960, Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act of 1960, right? Next we see about Patents Act of 1970, Patents Act of 1970. Next topic is Tobacco Board Act of 1975, Tobacco Board Act of 1975, right? Next topic we see is marine products export. Marine product export, right friends? That is Marine Product Export Development Authority of 1972. Development Authority of 1972. Let me repeat once again here. That is Marine Product Export Development Authority Act of 1972, right friends? 1972. Then next topic we would see is Water Prevention and Control of Pollution Act of 1974. That is Water Pollution Act of 1974, right friends? Next topic is Territorial Water. Next topic is Territorial Water, Continental Shelf, Exclusive Economic Zones and Other Maritime Zones Act of 1976, right friends? Next act is Species Board Act of 1986. Species Board Act of 1986, right? Next topic is Maritime Zone of India 1980. Maritime Zone of India 1980, right? Next is Air Prevention and Control of Pollution Act of 1981. Air Prevention and Control of Pollution Act of 1981, right friends? 1981. Next topic is National Dairy Development Board of 1987. National Dairy Development Board of 1987, right friends? Next important topic is rules for the manufacture use, right friends? Rules for manufacture, use, import, export and storage of hazardous microorganisms or genetically engineered organisms or cells 1989, right friends? It is little bit bigger but very much important friends, right? Rules for manufacture, use, import, export and storage of hazardous microorganisms or genetically engineered organisms or cells 1989, right friends? So it is Act of 1989, so you should refer it, right friends? Next topic is Foreign Trade Development and Regulation Act of 1992. Foreign Trade Development and Regulation Act of 1992. Sorry, 1992. Next topic we will see is Protection of Plant Variety and Farmers Right Act of 2001 friends, right? Next is Biological Diversity Act of 2002. Biological Diversity Act of 2002. Next topic is Plant Quarantine Regulation of Import into India Order 2003. So you should refer this act friends, right? Because here the word quarantine is came and the word quarantine is very much familiar with the COVID-19 cases, that is quarantine, right friends? So you should refer this topic, this act very much, right friends? Next we see Biological Diversity Rules 2004. Biological Diversity Rules 2004. Next is the Food Safety and Standard Act of 2006. The Food Safety Standard Act that is of 2006. Next is the Persons with Disability Act of 1995. The Persons with Disability Act of 1995. Next we see MGNREGA Act friends, right? MGNREGA Act, that is Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme friends, right? So this one. Next we see here RTI Act. You should refer about RTI. Next we see about the SEZ Act of 2005, that is Special Economic Zone Act of 2005. Next is Geographical Indication of Goods Registrations and Protection Act of 1999. Geographical Indication of Goods Registration and Protection Act of 1999. So you need to refer it. Next is the Consumer Protection Act of 1986. Consumer Protection Act of 1986. Next we see about the Indian Partnership Act of 1932. Indian Partnership Act of 1932. Right. Next topic is currency futures trading. Currency futures trading. Next is commodity future trading. Commodity future trading. Next is equity future trading. You need to differentiate between these three as well, friends. Right. Next we see about Companies Act of 1986. Yes, 1956. Right, 1956. I hope we have done with this, friends. No. Right, friends. Next topic is Companies Act of 1956. Companies Act of 1956. Next is Forest Contract Regulation Act of 1952. Forest Contract Regulation Act of 1952. So you need to see these things all, friends, right? And next we see about the Court Fee Act of 1870. The Court Fee Act of 1870, right, friends? 1870. Next we see Government of India Rules 1961. Government of India Rules 1961. Next topic is the General Insurance Business Nationalization Act of 1992. The General Insurance Business Act of 1972, friends, right? This is 1972, not 92. So 72. Next is SBI Act of 1955. Next act is the Banking Companies Act of 1949. The Banking Companies Act of 1949. Right, friends? So by this, most probably we have done with all kind of acts, friends, right? So here next we are doing some sort of regulation acts, and these are from history, friends. Till now we have discussed these all with the point of view of the polity, friends, right? So from here we will discuss regarding the history, friends. Next in this, our first act would be Regulation Act of 1773. Regulation Act of 1773. Second is Charter Act of 1833. Charter Act of 1833. Next is Indian Council Act of 1858. Indian Council Act of 1858. Next is Government of India Act of 1935. Next is Anarchical and Revolutionary Crime Act of 1919. Right, friends? Anarchical, let me write the spelling here. ANARCHICAL. Anarchical and Revolutionary Crime Act of 1919. Right. Next is Rowlatt Act of 1919. Rowlatt Act of 1919. Right. Next topic is Indian Council Act of 1861. Indian Council Act of 1861. Indian Council Act of 1861. Next act we see here is Indian Council Act of 1892, and next is 1909. Right, friends? So these all acts you have to see, look, friends, right? And in this you need to look at each and every provision, friends, right? So next we see here Charter Act of 1813. Charter Act of 1813. Charter Act of 1813. Next, Regulating Act of 1858. 1858. Next is Pitt's India Act. Pitt's India Act. Next is Ilbert Bill 1883. Ilbert Bill 1883. 1883. Next is Government of India Act of 1909, 1947, 1935. Right, friends? Government of India Act of 1909, 1935, 1947. These three you need to refer, right? Next we see about Charter Act of 1853. Charter Act of 1853. Next is the first Factory Act of 1881. The first Factory Act of 1881. Next is the Arms Act. The Arms Act. Next, the Public Safety Act. The Public Safety Act. Next is the Vernacular Press Act. The Vernacular Press Act. Right. Next is National Forest Policy of 1988. National Forest Policy of 1988. Right. Next is Representation of People's Act of 1996. Right. 1950, 1951. These three you need to compare as well, friends. Right. So next we see about National Human Rights Commission Act of 1993. National Human Rights Commission Act of 1993. Next topic is various state reorganization acts. Various state reorganization acts. Next thing is the Protection of Women from Domestic Violence Act of 2005. 2005. Next topic is Indian Electricity Act of 1910. Indian Electricity Act of 1910. Next topic is Electricity Supply Act of 1948. Electricity Supply Act of 1948. Next topic we see here is Electricity Regulatory Commission Act of 1998. Right. So here let me tell you once again, friends, this topic is Electricity Regulatory Commission Act of 1998. Right. Next is Electricity Act of 2003. Electricity Act of 2003. Next is RBI Act of 1934. RBI Act of 1934. Next topic is National Rural Employment Guarantee Act of 2005. Right. That is National Rural Employment Guarantee Act of 2005. Right. 2005. Next topic is the Minimum Wages Act of 1948. The Minimum Wages Act of 1948. Next topic is Regulating Act of 1793. Right, friends? 1793. I hope you understood these topics, friends. If you have any doubt, I mean, if the sound is not clear, let me know in the comment section, friends. By that I can tell you. Next thing we see here some other acts, friends, and by that we will end up with the acts. Next act is Trade Dispute Act of 1929. Trade Dispute Act of 1929. Next is Factories Act of 1881. Factories Act of 1881. Next is Government of India Act of 1919. So this thing we have done earlier as well in early slide. So it was double. So this topic is repeated, friends. Right. So next is Supreme Court Enlargement of Criminal Appellate Jurisdiction Bill of 1968. Right, friends? 1968. So you need to go for this. Next is read all 14 private member bills, friends. Right? Read all 14 private member bills. The Rights of the Transgender Bill of 2014. This is the latest, friends. Right? Next is Prohibition of Benami Property Transaction Act of 1988. Right? Prohibition of Benami Property Transaction Act of 1988. And the next topic is the Prevention of Insults to National Honor Act of 1971. Next is Representation of People's Act of 1951. This thing I have said you earlier as well. Next, FEMA Act, friends. Right? FEMA Act. So let me write here FEMA Act, friends. Right? Next is Bureau of Indian Standards Act of 1986. It will give the standards for the particular products, friends, like gold, silver and etc. as well, friends. Right? Next is Wildlife Protection Act of 1972. Read about Wildlife Protection Act of 1972 and read about what are the animals which are covered under this schedules as well, friends. Right? If it is mentioned, or else just leave it. Right? Next is The Gram Nyayalaya Act of 2008. The Gram Nyayalaya Act of 2008. 2008 friends, right? 2008. Next is the nation's 2001 Energy Conservation Act, right? The Energy Conservation Act of 2001. Next is the Food Safety and Standard Packing and Packaging and Labeling Regulation of 2011. This is different from the FSSAI friends, right? So I hope you got the clarity on this friends, right? So next we see about PISA Act friend, PISA Act, PESA, PISA Act of 1996. Next thing is Legal Service Authorities Act of 1987, Legal Service Authority Act of 1987. Sorry friend, 1987. I have spelled as 1987, right? It's my mistake. Next is the Banking Regulation Act of 1949, the Banking Regulation Act of 1949. Next topic is Indian Council Act of 1892. I hope this as well we have covered in earlier video itself friends, right? So Indian Council Act of 1892. Next thing, the Employees State Insurance Scheme. Next is Banking Regulation of 1949. This thing we have done here as well, right? Next thing is Banking Regulation Act of 1972, right friends? 1972 as well. You need to look at this. Next is Reserve Bank Act 1956. Next is Indian Biological Diversity Act of 2002. Indian Biological Act of 2002 friends, right? So right friends, by this we have ended the acts topic friends, right? So from here we will be discussing some other friends, right? But before that, let me tell you one thing. I'll end up this video here itself because the video will be little bit longer or else, right friends? So I hope you understood the situation. So thank you friends. Do like, share for Acquire IAS. If you have any doubts, let me know in the comment section and give me your feedback friends. So thank you very much. Have a great day.